Well, a neighborhood on edge tonight after a double murder at the Sonoma Canyon Apartments near the medical center. Tonight, we have new information about the victims as police search for the suspect. Eyewitness News reporter Adi Guajardo spoke with residents in the Northwest Side neighborhood where the couple was killed.
It's a knock that snapped this neighbor and her mother into reality. Both wanted to remain anonymous after a woman, identified as a 21-year-old, was found dead outside a neighboring balcony. And 23-year-old Nicholas Milanovich, who was shot in the head, died at the hospital.
I'm scared to be here. I feel threatened.
The images of her dead neighbor and the thought of a suspect on the loose now haunts her.
I didn't sleep at all. I would wake up probably every 2 hours, 3 hours, just to make sure that my doors were locked, my windows were locked.
She moved to Sonoma Canyon Apartments about a week ago, and now it's a center of a double murder investigation. Her surveillance camera rolling as police took the victim's car.
It was not a random event. It was targeted. We have reasons to believe that.
Police believe the person responsible broke in through a window on the first floor.
To put on record, they did have a lot of friends coming in and out of this place, a lot of friends.
The two victims moved in about 2 months ago, a short-lived moment leaving neighbors on edge.
I'm trying to get more cameras so I could put them either outside, upstairs, inside, everywhere, because like I said, I don't feel safe.
Adi Guajardo, KENS 5, Eyewitness News.